Hello, everyone. I hope you're doing well. If you can hear me okay, just give me a note in the comments just to make sure that my microphone is working all right and that everybody can hear me okay. So the first thing that I'll talk about is what we have left to complete in the semester. I think everybody can hear me. If you could just give me a comment just to make sure that you can hear me okay, then that would be great. But I'll start off by talking about what we have left to complete. So what assignments are left? We still have lab number 10, which is regression, Excel regression. So you might have already finished that assignment. That's great. But we still have lab 10 to finish off. The next one is the country profile. So the country profile is the team assignment. That is, one document per team, and that's a 5-page maximum. One country, and you'll work in the same teams as before. Okay, so the next question is around the test. So the final exam will be multiple choice. The information is posted on the course website. So make sure that you look at the announcement on the course website for all of the information about when your exam is and how to complete it. So the exam, it will be on Blackboard. Do not come to campus for the exam. The exam will be on Blackboard from your own device. It'll be multiple choice and it'll be open book. So you'll have an opportunity to use your own notes, to use the textbook, and the PowerPoint slides that we have gone through so far. Okay, so it seems like we have some people here. Again, if you could just give me a comment in the side here just to make sure that the audio is working okay. Things look good from my end, but if you could just let me know, that would be great. Okay, so I will get started then. If there are any questions about the test or the final assignment, please let me know, but all of the information is posted on the course website with all of the details. So the lecture today will be pretty short. It's the final chapter of this text and the final lecture of this course. So the content today is around report preparation and presentation. So by now, we're assuming that you've gone through the entire process. You've collected all of the data, you've analyzed it, and now it's about delivering that content to the decision maker. So today, the learning objectives for this chapter, number one, understand the process that should be followed in preparing and presenting the final report. So not only the written piece, but also the presentation of how it's all going to come together. Number two, explain the guidelines available for writing a report that includes graphs and tables. So any good report won't just be a bunch of written content. There'll be some illustrations, some graphics to help kind of tell that story and help kind of explain what's going on. Number three, describe how an oral presentation should be made and some of the principles involved. So here we're talking about actually delivering that content in the same room as a group of people. So, talking about the report and presenting it to the decision makers, the people who kind of hired you initially to do the job. Number four, discuss the importance of follow-up with the client and the assistance that should be given to the client in implementing and evaluating the project. So ideally, you're not just going to hand off this document and then that's it. Ideally, you would present the document to the team and follow up with any questions that they have, give some assistance, give some advice on how to actually implement the project. Number five, explain how the report preparation and presentation process differs in an international marketing, in an international setting. There are some subtle differences, but mostly similarities. And then finally, discuss the ethical issues related to the interpretation and reporting of the findings. So remember that this should be really objective. There shouldn't be a lot of opinion here. It should be just presenting the facts based on how you found them. So you're not trying to prove something right or prove something wrong. You're just presenting a set of facts. This is the last time we're going to see this slide. So step 1, defining the problem. Step 2, developing an approach. Step 3, formulating a research design. That's where we spent most of the time this semester. Step number 4, doing the field work. Number 5, preparing and analyzing the data. And we are at step number 6. So preparing and presenting the report. So sharing it with the decision makers. Any questions so far? Everybody's all good? There's step 3 in large. We've seen that for the most part. Okay, so why is this report actually important? For the following reasons, the report and presentation are really important parts of the project. So doing the work, of course, is really important, but actually sharing that information with the people who want this knowledge is really the end goal. So number 1, this is the tangible product of the entire effort. You've done all the work, but now you're actually handing this off to a group or to a decision maker. This is what they're walking away with. This is what they're actually using to inform their decisions. Number 2, management decisions are guided by the report and the presentations. So if a management team or that decision maker is trying to decide on which way to go, what decision to make and how to make that decision, they're using this report to inform them, right, of how they're going to move. Number 3, involvement of many marketing managers in the project is limited to the written report and the oral presentation. So a lot of the people that you might be presenting to, this might be the only real interaction that you have with them. So some of the team members in that group that you're sharing the information with now, they might not have been part of the project from the beginning. Not everybody on the client's team will be involved in the entire project from start to finish. So this might be the only time that they actually, that some people actually become involved. So this is their chance to ask some questions, ask for clarification, and kind of go a little bit deeper into the project. Number 4, management's decision to undertake marketing research in the future will be influenced by the perceived usefulness of this report and presentation. So really what we're saying here is if you do a good job on the presentation side and you come across as confident and skilled, there's a better chance that you're going to get more work in the future. If you look unprepared and the project is messy and not well executed, then it's unlikely you're going to be rehired again or recommended again for another project. So the process itself, the preparation and presentation process, first you're defining the problem, doing the actual design and the field work. Then number 2, you're analyzing the data, then interpreting, making conclusions and recommendations. Then you're starting to prepare the actual report itself. So assembling everything together, followed by delivering that presentation to the decision makers. The client will read the report, and then there'll be some follow-up after that. So what does this report actually look like most of the time? A good format or a good kind of way to break this up is listed here. Starting off with the title page, just a nice cover page kind of showcasing what the document is about. Number 2, letter of transmittal. This is less common now, but if we look at an example here of a letter of transmittal, it's essentially just to show that this actually happened and the report was sent off. Kind of gives a little bit of context of the report, kind of why the report was initially written, and just kind of a record of sending the document off. Less useful now because we can have these confirmations of like read receipts in email and transferring documents electronically, but it still can be useful. The third part is the letter of authorization. So this is nice to include, which just kind of shows that the researcher was actually asked to complete the work, and who from the client side asked them to complete the work. Kind of what the scope was, how long the project was supposed to take, those sorts of details. Useful much later on, so maybe the client's kind of reading this document a year later or a longer time in the future and kind of reflects back to see, okay, why was this report actually undertaken? Why was this project started? Those kinds of details. Number 4, table of contents. Any large document, this is useful to have just to make it easier to find the information that you're looking for. Number 5, a list of tables. 6, a list of graphs. 7, a list of appendices. And 8, a list of exhibits. So similar to a table of contents, but just a little bit more detail in what we're actually showing here. So then we move on to kind of the start of the real written document. So the executive summary, which should include the major findings, the conclusions, and the recommendations. You can think of the executive summary as a really short recap of the entire document. So there should be no new information here. This should just be everything in here will be repeated later on in the document in more detail. The executive summary is a very, very, very condensed version of the entire document. So if somebody only has time to read one page, they should be able to read this page and get a good understanding of what's involved with the report. They won't get all the details, but they'll get a good understanding of the major findings, the conclusions, and what recommendations that you're making. Moving into the main body, the problem definition. So the background to the problem, why was this project undertaken in the first place, kind of what led to the need to start this project, and a statement of the problem. So identifying what the actual problem is and explaining that problem. Point number 11 would be the approach to the problem. So how is the researcher approaching the problem, and kind of what methods are they going to use? Number 12, the research design. So here we're talking about all of this stuff we've looked at already. So we worked our way through this course with these in mind. But when we come to the research design, here we're talking about the type of design, the information needs, if there was any data collected from secondary sources and primary sources, what techniques used for scaling, questionnaire development, did you pre-test, how did you pre-test, sampling techniques are going into how you build these samples, information on the field work. So this kind of, number 12 here, the research design, goes into detail kind of about your methodology, like how did you actually approach this and execute it. Point 13, the data analysis. So the methodology and the plan of data analysis. What methods did you use to kind of go through this and actually do the analysis? Then the results, followed by the limitation and caveats. So it's important to identify that there are some limitations here. Not every document is perfect, and you don't have an unlimited amount of time and an unlimited amount of resources to do all kinds of testing. So with the limitations here, you can talk about things that you wanted to test but weren't able to because of time constraints or other resources. But recognizing what limits are there and not trying to pretend that this is kind of a perfect document. Followed by the conclusions and recommendations. So here, after you've gone through all the analysis, you come to a conclusion to kind of finish off the document. And then C, the extra part, you have your exhibits. So what actual questionnaires did you use? What forms did you use? Showing those, maybe the statistical output, any lists, and kind of the other content that somebody might want to see if they were trying to get a better idea of how you collected the actual information. Any questions about this so far? No? Okay. So we've looked at the format of the report, so how to kind of break things down and organize things. Next, we're going to talk a little bit more about writing it in general. So when you are writing this report, think about the readers. So think about who's going to be reading it, who's going to be using it. And you should write it with those people in mind. If it's going to be written for marketing managers, for example, then think about what kind of language they use, what information they would need, and write it in a way that is useful for them. It should be easy to follow. It should be structured logically, should be written clearly. Part of structuring it logically and clearly is the format that we just looked at, so the way of organizing all of your content. Presentable and professional appearance. The looks of the report are really important. If you have great content, but it looks messy and isn't put together well, people are not going to trust your content as much. Even if it is really good, well-researched information, it won't be as trustworthy if it looks messy and sloppy. So the appearance is really important. Should be objective. So objectivity is critical here. You're not putting your own opinions. You're not putting your own kind of interpretations or ideas into it. Here, you're really just telling it like it is. You're giving the actual factual information. Reports that are really heavy in text can be difficult to consume. So wherever possible, kind of reinforce your text with images, whether that's tables or graphs. A graph is so much easier to interpret than a table, and a graph is so much easier to interpret than just a long body of text. We're trained to recognize visual patterns, so using a graph to explain something is really, really useful. So these could just be, regular graphs, pictures, maps, other visual content that helps kind of tell the story. It should be terse, so it should be, by terse I mean concise. No need to expand where it's not relevant. That being said, you should make sure that it's complete. So it's important to keep things kind of tightened up, but at the same time, you don't want to leave out key information. Don't just write for the sake of writing. Make sure that everything in the document is useful and you're not leaving anything out. Any questions so far? Okay, so some of the guidelines for the tables themselves. So I should have mentioned, just like normal, these slides are on the course website, so you can follow along the course website as well, and the PDF slides are there. So I'm going to jump ahead a few slides because the guidelines that we're looking at are for this slide here. So you can see we have a title across the top, and that title has the number of the table, so this is a table, and a description of what's actually happening here. So if we go back here, so every table should have a title and a number. So here we have the title and the number. So 1A and 1B. So you can see across the top we have table 13.2, and then we have the title, Hewlett-Packard sales by product category 2011. How you arrange the items are important as well. So arrangement of items should be in a way that emphasizes the most significant or most important aspect of the data. So here we're talking about the actual numbers. The most important part here is the information about, the financial information in this case. And the basis of measurement should be clearly stated. So we can see at the top here, it says revenue in millions of dollars. This is key. You might even want to say the currency as well. In this case, I think it would benefit from identifying the currency, but we probably assume that it's US dollars. This is something that I saw a lot of in the last assignment, so the first major paper that people submitted. It wasn't clear the context of what unit of measurement you were looking at. So you can see here that if you just read this number, 39,574, you might think that it's $39,574. But up at the top, we have revenue in millions of dollars. So multiply that by 1 million. It's important to recognize that and to identify what unit of measurement you're looking at here. Liters, rulings, spaces. So what we're talking about here are these lines across. So making sure that we line everything up. So all of our financial information here is lined up vertically. This is lined up as well. So the starting point of the business segments here are lined up. And we have these dotted lines going over just to keep things arranged in a way that is easier to review. Explanations and comments. So we have kind of a title here. So 5A is just the revenue in millions of dollars, 2011. So just some more information about kind of what's going on there. Sometimes there's extra information that can't be incorporated in the table, and you can explain that in footnotes. Here at the bottom, you'll note that it says the total adds up to something different because of whatever reason. So if there is extra information that you have to add, you can use that, the idea of a footnote in the bottom. And finally, it's really important to identify where the source data came from. Is this original research? Is it secondary data? And identify that in the bottom. So here you can see the source, in this case, was the 2011 annual report for HP. This is just another way to identify the graph as well. Okay, everyone good? Any questions about this so far? Doesn't look like it. Some other images to think about. So we've looked at kind of tables here already. You can also look at other ways of displaying information. So geographic maps can be really helpful in showing location information. Seeing a lot of really well done graphs and maps as well, with all of the COVID information right now, kind of where the hotspots are, where the most cases are, and you can see a lot of people are using graphical maps to overlay that data. Next, we'll talk about some specific types of graphs. So we have pie graphs or pie charts. In the pie chart, I think we've all seen a pie chart, but it's a circle split into slices of pie. Here it reflects a percentage of a specific variable. In using a pie chart, make sure that all of your variables add up to 100%. So a good use of a pie chart would be where where revenue is coming from. So actually in this chart, we have the revenues by business segment. All of these business segments together add up to 100%. That adds up to all of the revenue. So that would be a good source of the, or a good use of a pie chart. Bad uses of pie charts, if things don't add up to 100%, then it's not a good way to illustrate that information. Another thing to think about, you should limit the number of kind of slices. If there's more than 7 sections, things get really difficult to read on a pie chart. So if you have things that add up to 100% and you have more than 7 categories, what do? A good way to overcome that is just by having a section that says other. So you can see in this chart, for example, at the top, we have software and others as one of the categories. Sure, it doesn't give all of the information as to what's going on in those other categories, but it's still much easier to read. And if somebody wanted to go further into that information, you can provide extra details for that. Next, we'll talk about a line chart. So a line chart just connects a series of data points. It's a good way of looking at time series data. So you'll see stock charts, for example, as a really good example of using line charts. You have years or days across the bottom, you have time across the bottom, and then we'll say stock price on the vertical axis, and it tracks that line over time, and you can visually compare trends over time. You can also look at multiple series or multiple variables on the same chart, assuming that the units are the same. So line charts are really good at explaining or visualizing time-based data. Here's a line chart, but the line didn't show up, or it did show up, but it's very, very faint. And I'll fix that that line chart in a second here, but you can see if you look at this graph, we have a line going across the top that shows the change in revenue over time. So on the vertical axis, we have the revenue. On the horizontal axis, we have the years, and this line identifies the different points in time. Pictographs, sometimes you'll see pictographs, but they're not as precise. You should use some caution when you're using these pictographs. They kind of generally show trends, and they're similar to a bar graph in some ways, but not as useful if you're looking at really specific information. So here we have a dollar sign representing a certain amount of money, and showing the different kind of values throughout the years. But again, not often useful. Looking at bar charts and histograms, so a bar chart just displays data in a bar. It can be horizontal or vertical. We've done bar charts in SPSS, and I'm sure you've done bar charts in Excel before as well. Histogram is just a vertical bar chart, and the height of that bar chart is looking at the frequency of some occurrence or some observation. Again, this didn't show up as well on the PDF, but you can see the example of the bar chart, which is showing the values or the revenue over time in this this example. Okay, so some guidelines for graphs, schematic figures or flow charts. There's a lot of different kinds of flow charts or schematics. You can think of these as like assembly steps. So even when you buy something from IKEA and you have those visual assembly steps, that's kind of a schematic. You're showing what to do in a certain pattern or a certain set of steps. And flow charts are kind of a decision tree as well. So if this happens, then kind of move over to here and looking at the procedures of some event. We're not going to talk too much about classification diagrams, but you can look at those as well. So next we'll move on to the oral presentation. So here we've kind of finished the written document. Everything is assembled and put together. Now it's time to actually deliver that information in person to a group. One of the big keys is to really be prepared. You should have a good idea as to what you're going to say. A script can be helpful, but you want to make sure that you're not kind of over prepared or that it's not kind of too rigid. It should still be conversational most of the time. And you don't want it to look kind of too contrived. The presentation should be geared to the audience, so you should recognize and kind of understand the needs of the people in the room and deliver your presentation with that in mind. You should rehearse it, and you should kind of have that script, but again, you don't want to make it too rigid. And any visual aids, tables, graphs, you should be sharing those during the oral presentation. Ideally, there'll be a screen behind you where you're able to project something onto the screen, or sometimes it's helpful to physically print the information out, but that can be quite difficult. So ideally, you'll have a screen with you. It is important to maintain eye contact and to interact with the people in the group, so you're not just kind of up there mindlessly delivering this content. There should be some interaction, taking questions, reading the body language of people in the room. Try to avoid, we all do it, but try to avoid filler words like and you know and all right and I just did it there, but it's really difficult to avoid those entirely, but try to prepare in a way that you're not kind of relying on those words. The tell-em principle is another thing to think about, and it's a good way to structure a presentation. So the tell-em principle is you're going to tell them what you're going to talk about, then you're actually going to talk about it, and then you're going to tell them what you told them. So at the beginning of the presentation, you're going to kind of outline an agenda. You're going to tell the people in the room, here's what we're going to go over, here's the points, here's how it's going to be organized and broken down. Then the big chunk in the middle is where you're actually telling them the content, you're delivering the information. And then when you're finished, you go back and say, this is what we talked about. So you tell them what you're going to tell them, you tell them, and then you tell them what you told them, kind of wrapping everything up. Another useful guideline is the KISS principle. So KISS. The KISS principle is just keep it simple and straightforward. Right? Don't get too complicated. Don't get too complex. Just keep it simple. And body language. You should be aware of your own body language, and use that as an opportunity to kind of maintain some interaction in the room. When you're speaking, you should vary the volume and pitch and voice quality wherever possible. So this is another one that can be kind of difficult to do, but the more you present, the more you kind of prepare, and the more you reflect back on how you're doing this, the better you'll get, just like anything else. And finally, you should finish off with a strong closing. All good so far? Yeah. So reading the actual report, think about how people are going to be reading this. So does it address the problem? It should give all the background information, and it should clearly address the initial problem. The research design itself, it should be described in a way that's not too technical. Don't assume everybody reading it is a researcher. The execution of the procedures, so like making sure that you're identifying how all of this stuff came together. Numbers and statistics in tables and graphs, they should be, they should be obvious and they should be clear, but the person reading it should pay attention to those. Interpretation and conclusions. So the interpretation of the results should be a little bit different than the results themselves, if that makes sense. So the results are pretty factual, straightforward, this is what happened, and then any conclusions or recommendations that you're making should kind of reflect the fact that there's some interpretation happening. Generalizability, so it is the responsibility of the researcher to identify kind of how much you can generalize this and how valid this stuff is. So if the information that was researched and found in the conclusions were only applicable in a really narrow scenario, you should identify that. So the report itself should make it clear how reliable and how generalizable the findings are. Disclosure, it should be honest, and it should be kind of giving all of the background and context, really. Okay, so coming to the follow-up now. So at this stage, you've done all the work, you've assembled the report, you've given the presentation, the client has read the document. Now it's time to kind of follow up. So if the client does need a little bit of assistance, whether it means some questions that they had, or even just some guidance in how to execute the content and actually make decisions with the content, it's helpful for you to kind of be there and provide some follow-up. After the fact too, you should kind of reflect back on what worked well, what didn't, and use that as an opportunity to improve for the next time around. Okay, so we are coming near the end of the slides here. Something important to mention for an international context, it goes back to being able to kind of read the room and know who your audience is. But in certain cultures, in certain parts of the world, it's important to make jokes, and it's important to kind of be an entertainer when you're delivering presentations. In other parts of the world, they just want the facts. So jokes wouldn't be appropriate. In some cultures, just understand who your audience is what it really comes back to. When it comes to ethical information, make sure that you are giving an honest kind of recommendation. You've looked at all of the relevant information. You're not kind of avoiding any difficulties. You're not pretending like every single part of the project was perfect and that you can generalize this to every single potential situation. Obviously, you don't want to falsify any figures or change any results. And you should also make sure that you're interpreting things properly. Okay, so we are at the end now. We've gotten through the entire content of the course. If anybody does have any questions right now, I'd be happy to kind of answer those. But the other things that I wanted to highlight are what we have left to do. So we have Lab 10. You might have already finished Lab 10, but if you haven't finished Lab 10, make sure you have submitted that. So that's regression in Excel. Then we have the country profile. These are the group country profiles. Remember that now it's only one country and a maximum of 5 pages. So make sure that your country profile is a maximum of 5 pages when you submit it. The information on the test has been posted to the course website. So you will have a designated day, depending on what section you're in. You'll have a designated day to complete the test. You have flexibility when you start the test, but once you start it, you have to finish it in the same sitting. So once you press start, you have 90 minutes to finish that test. You can't pause it. You can't come back later. You can't turn your computer off and then expect to redo it at another time. The questions are multiple choice, and they will be about 10 or so questions per chapter that we looked at. So if you look at the announcement in the course website, it goes into detail about all of the information about the final test. Okay, so I don't see any questions coming through. I wanted to thank you for a great semester. I hope you found it informative, and I would much rather be in the classroom, but I think these video chats kind of worked well for the last few weeks. If you do have any questions, please let me know over email or in the discussion board on the course website, and good luck.